You'll recall in the last video, I told you that the dam was about to break, that by getting an apology out of at least the Japanese branch of Ubisoft, this would embolden other people to come forward with what they believe were more egregious violations of Japanese culture on behalf of the French game development company Ubisoft. This is Satoshi Hamada. Now, he's a member of Japan's Congress. He sits in one of the upper houses, what equivalates to our Senate, I believe, what equivalates to our Senate. And this man represents a party that is invested in the control of media in Japan. He is part of a party known as the Party to Protect the People from NHK, which was originally established to protect people from licensing fees in order to watch television, much like how the BBC is conducted over in Britain. Now, I want to remind you guys that while that doesn't sound like a guy that's going out there and beating the drum for freedom and righteousness, you have to remember what brings people to the table isn't exactly how they get recorded into history, right? And this gentleman, being invested in media itself, as a consumer of it, and of course, running for a party that wants to monitor how it's distributed in Japan, took an interest in I guess what was going on the internet over there and the discussion around the situation evolving with Yasuke, and here we are. No mistake about it. This is what he had to say about it down here. And he says, "We are looking for your feedback." Now, this is in Japanese. This is what the text is intended to say down here, okay? So what this says is, "We are looking for your feedback. We are consulted, we were consulted by a French game company about a historical alteration of Japan." Now, this is Google Translate goofing things up. He says, "We were made aware that a French company is making historical altercations about Japan." This is what he's intending to say here, not that Ubisoft came and told them, "Nah, nah, boo boo, we are making these changes." No, that's this. It's a little goofy with Google Translate and, anything other than the Latin-based languages. The content of the consultation is shared below in images. We have also quoted a post that appears to point out the problem with the game in question. We would like to hear your specific requests and opinions. All right. Now we're going to go over here and look at the tweet that he quote tweeted that originally started this discussion. Then we'll get into what's going to happen about this. And it says this person writes in Japanese. I believe they're a Japanese citizen. And they write, "Don't misunderstand the reason why Assassin's Creed is on fire." Again, we're going to have to ask Google Translate to work overtime here. So I'll try to correct things as I come across them with what my best guess of the intent is here. All right. You have to bear with me. And it says, "I don't really care that the main character is black. People other than Japanese are just starting a flame war." And this person is, of course, referring to the SJWs that you might even see in the comments section below, raging about a character being black, even though in reality, the problem isn't that Yasuke is black, it's that his history has been rewritten and Japanese history has been so abused by this company in an effort to make a game that's really looking like it's going to be pretty boring, honestly. But let's get back into what started this, all right? They said, "I made a video with Japanese experts. The seasons, the buildings, and the mannerisms are all messed up. Do they really listen at Ubisoft? The premium box with concept art as bonus is expensive. The suspicion behind this is that they used AI that was trained on a mess of Japanese era photos." Now, what he means by this is that this would be reenactment photos. These would be stock photography that's been made available through iStock.com and all these other places out there. Um, what do you mean? What this? I assume they're he. This person means is that the AI. I don't believe it's AI. What we've seen is it's photo bashing. They're taking pictures from the internet and just jamming them in here, and they're like, "Oh well, we don't care. We're gonna do it anyway. We promise not to do it again. No, we promise, but we're gonna do it now. Still, great business work." This person goes on and they said in the concept video, in the art that they showed, right, and Ubisoft showed, they were using Chinese kanji. This again, goofs up. They were using Chinese kanji in the advertisement they were making up about this. And now again, like we were seeing the concept art coming out. This is part of that. Part of what they were showing us is the development art, the ideation of what was going to be showing in there featured Chinese language, not Japanese kanji. And I don't know what the term for Chinese language characters are. I apologize. I'm not that versed in what goes on over there. I just take a fascination with Japanese culture. As expected, the complaints started to come into Ubisoft, and the manufacturer got angry. That's right. The racists criticized them by saying, "Don't complain. This is where Japanese people and don't complain." And this is where most Japanese people get the most angry about this. Because again, this is their culture, and then they're being shut down by Westerners saying, don't get upset about this. This is not important, you see. And so, again, this poster goes on to say the Japanese wouldn't have been upset if they being Ubisoft, had simply apologized. But the problem isn't the manufacturer's negligence in refusing to admit any of their mistakes. A petition has begun in order to stop the release of the game and the book here and now. And so that's where this person that started this, because again, this is a Congress member effectively in Japan saying that this is important enough that he wants to collect people's opinions about this. Now let's talk about Mr. Hamada. I introduced you a little bit about him, but let's go over and look at his profile. So, according to the Japanese government itself, he is a sitting member of the House of Councilors in the National Diet of Japan. Now, again, this may seem like very strange language to use, but when you go look up the Oxford definition of diet, it does have a partial definition way down below that it is occasionally used to describe the meeting of stakeholders, regional leaders, and just generally a government meeting. And so the Diet of Japan is meant to express the Congress of Japan, the lawmakers of Japan. And so he sits in an upper house, which effectively acts like our Senate. But again, because it's a different country, there are different powers and limitations associated with that house that are not reflected here in the West. This is what we have to understand. As I pointed out earlier, he is part of the Party to Protect the People from NHK. Again, this was the news agency that was going to ask people to get a license in order to watch their content, much like how the BBC operates. And so he is currently, as of July 10th, sitting on the Committee for General Affairs. And this falls underneath that. This is what's going on in their country. This game will become available that besmirches their culture, that makes their history into something it never was, and then promotes this character that they've created, by the way. They borrow the name Yasuke. They borrow the short write-up about him in the history of Japan that doesn't even make it into historical textbooks, by the way. You have to be someone who's very interested in regional history and Nobunaga himself to know anything about Yasuke. He just didn't exist until this outsider, this foreigner, a fellow that looked like me, showed up and started making him a big deal back in the 60s. So, but we see here this fellow also sits on the Committee on Oversight of Administration Special Committee on Official Development Assistant, Related Matters, as well as the Okinawa and Northern Problems. So this guy is what that translates to roughly, and this is roughly what that means, is that this guy is sitting on a committee that controls what goes on for people's discussion. It takes into account, rather. I'm sorry, I got a message just in the middle of that. Nothing related to this. It's just a random Discord message me asking how my day is. It's just how it goes. You're recording and this stuff goes, whatever. So this guy is sitting on a committee that is meant to address the problems of the people. Now you'd think like, oh, well, that's like the politician's mainstay. No, no, no. They have a specific committee that is dedicated to addressing people's concerns. Because again, in Japan, what concerns the national level politicians, right, tends not to be what concerns the average people. What a surprise. It's almost like we have that here in the US and every other place on earth, right? Well, the Japanese actually have a committee here that's dedicated to developing assistance and these related matters, right? So again, this is going to be part of that committee that he's part of. And what I want to specify about this is he's gathering this information with the intention of bringing it to the Diet of Japan, the National Diet, to their Congress to talk about this. Now, It seems silly. Oh, it's a video game. Just get over it. Blah, blah, blah. You must understand, while culture is sort of interchangeable here in the US because of how our melting pot culture works, in Japan, culture is very much a monolith. The people that live there are direct descendants of the people that effectively began civilization on that island, not the people that come from many different parts around the world like you and I and others do, not the people that potentially came here after the Industrial Revolution, after World War II. And that's really what people tend to forget about Japan when they observe how stringent and like passionate they are about their culture and history. They seem to forget that Japan is Japanese. you know, we in America, we look around, we see people from all around the world, fresh and new, generations long families, fresh off the boat people that are here to start their lives over in a new land with a new language, new currency, and new ideas. But in Japan, this is not the case. Until just a few years ago, I want to say about 5 years ago, you had to have a bachelor's degree in order to immigrate there. Before that, I want to say this was something like 12, 15 years ago, you had to have a job lined up in order to immigrate to Japan. You couldn't just show up. Today you can just show up and go from there. Mostly, it's not as open as it is in the United States where anybody who's got a problem can show up, but Japan is loosening these restrictions. And the reason why I bring all of that up is to contextualize Japan's idea of how outsiders interpret their culture, of how Japan itself is to interpret its own culture. The Japan I know is a culture that works in tandem with the US's, that they embrace freedom, but they also understand that they themselves have an issue with private and public interactions, okay? So what you do in private, meaning if you want to be very, very zealous and excited about Yasuke, this is something you do in private. You don't put a placard on your chest and go around waving a sign that says Yasuke is the greatest samurai there ever was. This upsets the social cohesion. And I want to remind you guys too, in Japan, there are laws that say that you can push someone out of the way if they are going up the staircase the wrong way. This is how powerful the social cohesion laws are to protect their culture. When it comes to protesting, you have to have a permit, which requires the permission of the place that you're protesting. Again, like Japan has a very different political climate. And why I explain all of that is in order to contextualize how serious it's become that someone who is in charge of representing the people's concerns of his district, now again, I want to stress that seems obvious, but he's on a committee specifically designed for this. He's going out and he's receiving complaints from the public in magnitude enough that he's decided to pay attention to it. And he's decided he wants to bring it to Congress, the National Diet of Japan about this. And the reason why I use Shinzo Abe in the thumbnail, right? I had people ask me about this. The reason why I use Shinzo Abe in the thumbnail is because he was very passionate. He's the prime minister of Japan, former prime minister of Japan, who was assassinated recently by the guy with the homemade gun. And so he had a tumultuous relationship in Japan. He's a religious man that belonged to a religion that had some different ideas about the world than what most people in Japan were down for. But Shinzo believed very passionately in the Japanese people and their culture. He did not want to see outsiders take control. And also, he was very, very upset with how young men would spend their time idolizing things in media as opposed to going out and living life. And this is why I use him in the thumbnail when you see him appear here in this conversation, is because this man loved his country. And again, I didn't live under his rule. I only know what came out of Japan about him, what came out about him after his life even. And I still think about the guy almost every day. He's very, very passionate about his people, very protective of their culture, very protective of their right to exist and proliferate and be happy. Now, his idea of happiness was different than a lot of people's, and that's what, led to his demise, unfortunately. But we've seen this happen in our own culture, in our own lands, several times. And so we have to accept that while, Japan is changing, figures like Shinzo Abe and their message is very important. And that's what you're seeing play out here. This man may not necessarily believe in Shinzo Abe or even like the guy, but the message that he's spreading is that Japanese culture is sacred to Japanese people, and they shouldn't be made to suffer an indignity like this. Having their culture so corporatized that it doesn't matter when, where, or how it came to be. In a game that professes itself to be historically accurate of all things. Blows the mind, honestly. And so we have this one final write-up here by this person who had a lot to say about this whole issue. And so we'll go down here and we'll read this person's first post. There's 3 of them. And they say, although the production team has revealed many instances of cultural appropriation and discrimination against Japanese people, the game is essentially a work of fiction that follows a creative, true story while outwardly remaining faithful to historical facts. This time, the based on historical facts section ignores Yasuke's records and Japanese history and culture, and the depictions in history also greatly denigrate Japanese history and culture. This person goes on to clarify further what they're talking about, and they say the development company has also shown, this is Ubisoft, has also shown no signs of acceptance of any complaints. They did apologize about the Sekigahara Rifle Club. I do want to say that. They did apologize. That didn't mean anything because it didn't stop them, but they said sorry at least. And finally, the Japanese branch's X account apologized for one clear copyright violation, ignored the English version, meaning the English-speaking account of Ubisoft, never announced this, never acknowledged this mistake, and continued promoting Assassin's Creed Shadows with no problem whatsoever. Overseas media has also published articles defending the development and mocking the complaints of Japanese and the people alike. And I think that these actions denying Japan, along with the game itself, are problematic. And this borrows an SJW word. They're clever over there. You got to give them more credit. They're clever over there. And it says, P.S. There are also over a dozen other suspected commercial copyright infringements, both in Japan and overseas, and the theft of designs from national cultural properties also has been pointed out. This rewriting of history based on this historical perspective is widespread on the web, and opponents are accused of racism. That's right. You'll see it down in the comments section below. People who don't bother reading this, but just assume, oh, it's Assassin's Creed Shadow and a white guy's talking. That means that there's racism. Well, I'm sorry. I happen to think it's more hateful to rewrite a man's real lived life because a bunch of people in France or working for France didn't find his real life interesting enough. I would like to add, even without the Yasuke issue, this is a media art that is greatly damages Japanese culture. And he's right. This person is absolutely right. Again, I point this out, that Japan has a very monolithic culture. When you go tampering with that because you don't find it interesting or PC enough, politically correct enough, you're just creating a slap in the face to these people. The West, America, Europe, France, whoever you want to point the finger at, really needs to grasp the idea that Japan, the East, other cultures that aren't our own are not our toy box. If you want to have a black samurai, make up a new guy, make up a fictional realm, have him fight dragons, have him fight origami dragons that came from space. Maybe they cracked from inside of the moon like a giant New Year's egg. And confetti fell out and the confetti was dragons. And his name is Jeff, right? Like I said before, this probably wouldn't be as offensive to people if it wasn't Yasuke. If he was just a black guy that came up on shore and they gave him samurai armor and said, hey man, we got a Templar problem, right? The assassins had this freshly executed samurai that they took care of. Probably wouldn't be that kind of egregious, right? But then you step out of the Yasuke situation, as this user did here, and you see the greater problem with Ubisoft's, I don't know, the entire development of this, really, front to back, when you put it all into like perspective. They don't care about Japan. This was like a quick Google image search, Wikipedia scroll of like, oh, there's a black guy. Let's focus on that. And that was it. They abuse everything else in culture because apparently whoever they hire for consultation on Japanese history just doesn't get it. Didn't bother to correct any of it, or at the very least, got satisfaction in letting all of these things go through. But I don't know. We'll have to wait and find out if it actually ends up in Congress. So if it does, who knows? Maybe it will lead to an all out ban. You keep an eye on that petition, and so will I. And until then, good luck out there.